Good morning and welcome to First Atlantic Commerce. Here on the FAC Live Show, we cover all things e-commerce in the Caribbean. Our guests join us from all over the world and generously share their expertise, knowledge, and insight into the digital world and how we operate within it. If you join us from LinkedIn, thank you so much. Don't forget to like and follow our page to continue seeing content that will help you grow your business online. Today, we're talking about funding and raising capital for Caribbean startups and growing businesses. As always, I'm joined by someone at FAC, Eldridge. He is the Senior Vice President at Business and Partner Development. And we also have two other individuals who are from Jamtown. Wait, am I allowed to say that? Is that appropriation? Anyways, so we're joined by Cherie Williams, CEO and founder of Veekle, a peer-to-peer car rental platform, as well as Dr. David Walcott, founder of NovaMed, a healthcare investment firm focused on healthcare services, medical education, and health innovation. So we're going to bring everybody in because we only have 60 minutes and people think that's a lot of time, but there's so many subjects to cover. How is everybody today? I know Jamaica is seeing a storm, and this climate change definitely has turned us over our head. How are we going? Everybody's good?
We're good. We're excellent.
Yeah? Okay. All right. So hopefully we will see it through for the next 60 minutes. So I want to just get right into it and ask Cherie, what is one of the most common challenges faced by Caribbean startups when seeking funding? Because a lot of us are watching Shark Tank going, that's the real world. But bring us down a notch. Let us know what to expect in terms of challenges within the Caribbean.
I think that one of the biggest challenges we face as startups in this space is limited access to investors, especially those who are willing to support early stage businesses, right? I found that our region is somewhat unique in that local investors tend to prefer more established business. They are more risk averse. And so the support for startup is not developed as much as in other areas. And also there hasn't really been any success stories in the region when it comes to startups, which can also make it harder to convince investors of the startup potential here, right? And so all of that combination just, from what I've seen when I started, just doesn't necessarily work well for startups in this space. But however, I've also seen a shift in mindset over the 5 years that I've been working on this. So there's a lot more to do, but again, there's still a lot of challenges that are faced by startups in the region. So it's access to investors, and also not enough success stories, and investors are just more risk averse here in the region.
That's such a great point because, when going back to the idea of Shark Tank and what our perception of these things are, you always have this callback of, okay, where are these people now? And some folks may have fell through. I actually know of a Trinidad, actually, second generation Trinidadian who went on the Canadian version of it. And the investment didn't go through, but because of the exposure, he expanded tremendously, and it's actually ice cream. So it's so interesting because, we tend to follow what we see, and it's really hard when you don't see it. So, David, when it comes to this idea of comparison, because let's be honest, we all do it, what's the funding landscape like compared to, we have the Caribbean region and then globally? You have any insight on that?
Yeah, so it's interesting, being in the Caribbean because our financial markets while they've evolved significantly over the past few decades, they still haven't evolved to support early stage companies, and a part of that is because of the size of the region, right? Early stage companies involve significant levels of risk. And for risk to be justified, it has to be matched by an equal sort of reward on the other side, right? And so when you have smaller markets, there's a ceiling to the level of, I suppose, financial gain. Certainly, if you're operating a business that targets the local market or regional market. And so that is a part of why the capital market ecosystem haven't evolved to support early stage companies. Whereas naturally, this is very different in advanced economies like the US, that has these established microhabitats for startup funding, Silicon Valley, Boston, New York, you name it. But we're also seeing similar patterns emerge in larger emerging markets. So, Brazil, uh, Kenya, South Africa. I mean, these while being emerging markets, the startup ecosystems have evolved significantly, and I think it's only as we go through a more sort of globalized um, transition, and startups seek to build global businesses more and more, even from the Caribbean, we're going to see a lot more, early stage capital coming in because the reward now justifies the risk.
It's interesting to me because I always like to reference whoever went to Barbados and Soriana, because that's an investment, right? Obviously, it's different in entertainment, but someone saw it, so when it comes to that investment, and they say invest in what you know, how is it going to, I guess, change or shift if the players who are, who have access to resources don't necessarily know the Caribbean? Because even when you invest in something and you lose, that's part of the game, but you feel more comfortable when you know the industry. So anyone would like shed any light on that?
Yeah, well, I think it really is a matter of, you have a strategic advantage if you reduce the uh, level of information asymmetry between you and the opportunity, right? So whether it's investing in an industry, you immediately have an advantage, and of course, as you said, that's a big part of Novamed's hypothesis. We have a very deep knowledge advantage in healthcare that massively increases our odds of success, which is important, especially in early stage investing. The same for investing by geography. If you understand a certain geography, naturally that the sort of nuances as to how consumers operate, the nuances as to how capital flows, you're immediately at an advantage. And so I think, to your point, a large part of the ecosystem building that has to take place in the region has to be done by the region, right? And once we start investing in ourselves, late and early stage businesses alike, it will attract a sufficient level of external interest.
Okay, I want to head over to the section with Lisa. Shout out to Lisa. She is definitely an OG when it comes to the FAC live show. Thanks again for sharing your time with us. So I want to shift the conversation to Eldred when it relates to this investment and this conversation around startups and growing your business. How important is the e-commerce space? Because it's still so new in the Caribbean, and is that a challenge?
Well, thanks, Pauline. With regards to payments, and especially e-commerce, is the fastest, easiest way to start accessing the ability to take payments. And then obviously that's why we're all in business, right? To be able to take payments and make money. So e-commerce is not only the fastest way, but it's the easiest to implement and deploy for newcomers. One of the challenges, obviously, that we're talking about in the region is the fragmentation that the region represents with regards to being able to take these payments. You have a number of different financial institutions, different payment players that are associated with these financial institutions. And when you going into one market, like David was saying, trying to generate opportunities of revenue from one market versus multiple markets where the ROI is more attractive, you want to be able to operate, take payments in all these different markets that you want to play in. And having a partner, for instance, like FAC, who has painstakingly for years connected all these financial institutions across all these markets is key to deploying a payment strategy. So from our perspective, deploying e-commerce is fast, is easy, low friction, very low tech lift. We're connected with everybody, which makes it easier to be able to now put a strategy in place to identify key markets that give you that ROI without the concerns that going into these markets is going to have an additional investment or time delay or time to market. So e-commerce is absolutely top of mind. But understanding what e-commerce represents, right? So everybody thinks about websites. E-commerce today is much more than just a website, and we can talk about that further. But when we talk about payment strategy, e-commerce or card not present is key to our foundation.
All right, thanks for that, Eldred. I want to pop into the comments section on LinkedIn, and we have a question from Ryan Smith. And I like to pride myself in saying I am representative of the people. So the question is, what about BPO startups? Do you help with those? And first and foremost, what is BPO? Somebody want to chime in and explain what that is before we answer the question? Or we want Ryan to expand on the acronym? We'll wait on Ryan to expand on that. All right. So, Ryan, can you let us know what the BPO stands for? And we will definitely answer your question. So, when it comes to Caribbean startups, Cherie, this one's for you. What is, well, I mean, we talk about the challenges, but what is the most popular funding source for Caribbean startups? We have this new trending entrepreneur space. We talk about angel investors, venture capital, crowdfunding. But what exactly exists for the Caribbean?
I would say angel investors is probably one of the first set of funding that you would most likely receive outside of friends and family would be angel investing. And the Caribbean also relies heavily on government grants and development banks to support startups. The angel network in the Caribbean is fairly still nascent, but it is growing and it's becoming a little bit more popular. Also, crowdfunding. A lot of people don't know that you can actually crowdfund for your startup. However, there's pros and cons with crowdfunding. But I would say angel investing, government grants, development banks, crowdfunding. I think development banks especially are pivotal when it comes to providing funding for innovation in key sectors. So they look at, say, agriculture or tourism or technology. So those I would say are the main sources of funding for startups. And then as your business scales, you get into the VC world and other types of funding.
Okay, that's good to know. So David, do you have any insight on how this space has evolved? Because I do see, some newspaper ads talking about the IDB has a grant, or you have specific sectors, depending on where you are in the Caribbean, that you get access to this. But how has that evolved?
Yeah, so, I think it's being, maybe increasingly institutionalized and increasingly decentralized. So what I mean by that is angel investing was really an ad hoc event, right? Someone who has a bit of disposable capital, you pitch your idea to them, or they have a vested interest in your success and they place capital behind you. And of course, that was done on a relatively informal basis. Naturally, it still happens now, but what we see globally, which has spread to the Caribbean, is these networks of individuals organizing. And so you have angel networks, you have sort of privately held angel funds. And so we're seeing an increasing level of organization, which is useful in democratizing access to early stage capital. You're also seeing a greater level of decentralization, and what I mean by that is, whereas capital was sort of controlled by a very tight few, Of course, while those dynamics still exist to a certain extent, you're seeing more and more placement of capital beyond the confines of the typical, gatekeeping institutions, and that is useful because that is what allows the ecosystem en masse to scale. And what that looks like is institutions placing capital, legacy institutions rather, placing capital into the hands of newer institutions and allowing them to allocate that capital towards productive gain. So I'll give an example. Development Bank of Jamaica, and I believe IDB as well, allocated some capital for a VC fund called M-Scale, which again is a startup venture firm. Of course, the principals have significant experience, but it represents a level of decentralizing which allows for the capital that appreciates early stage investment to be spread amongst a wider number of players.
Righty. It's definitely good to note. And Simone Thomas on LinkedIn, this is definitely being recorded and would be available once the live is over. So we're going to go on a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about successful pitch decks. Like, what does that look like? What do you need to start creating on that PowerPoint? We'll be right back. And welcome back. Thank you so much for joining First Atlantic Commerce. FSC Live covers all things e-commerce with guests joining us from different islands and around the world, sharing their knowledge in digital world and how we actually navigate with it. If you are joining us from YouTube, don't forget to smash that subscribe button to continue seeing live content around this e-commerce conversation. Today, we're discussing funding and raising capital for Caribbean startups and growing businesses. So we're going to bring our guests back in. We just went on a break, but before we did, we want to be able to have this conversation around a successful pitch deck. So, I think the common thing is this 10-second intro pitch deck, like elevator pitch, and being able to have something that someone's interested in. But what are the elements? Because being in this marketing world, a lot of people come up with these great ideas and they're like, okay, who is your target audience? And they tell me everybody, and I say, good luck, my friend, right? Because everybody has ideas. But when it comes to having a successful pitch deck for Caribbean investors, what are the key elements we need to start looking at? So Cherie, we want to start with you. Cherie, you there? Oh, no, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So your pitch deck needs to be clear about the problem and solution, focusing on local relevance at first, right? So you need to really be able to articulate what it is that you're solving and exactly how are you solving it. Investors also want to see a team's experience to see if you're capable of handling what you're set out to do and the ability to handle Caribbean-specific challenges. Also, they're looking for the market opportunity, not just in the island that you're starting in, but how will you scale across the region? What does that market look like? And is there potential to even scale outside of the Caribbean? So you need to be able to show that in a way that clearly articulates how you can grow. Also, detailing how you're planning to use the funds that you're asking for is key. So not just stating that, hey, I'm looking to raise $500,000, but what are you going to do with not only what are you going to do with the $500,000, but how is the $500,000 going to get you from point A to point B, right? Also, financial predictions needs to be realistic and demonstrate some type of ROI for your investors. So I would say clearly articulating those items would you'll be able to present a good pitch deck, which is outside of actually pitching, right? So pitching, especially when I pitch, I always start with a story behind why is it that I started this company. Investors want to hear a story, not necessarily starting out with statistics. They want to hear the story. What's the story behind the company, right? And being able to articulate as you go through these slides, the problem, the solution, and everything that I just outlined. That's exactly how you create a successful pitch deck.
All right, thank you so much. And I want to shift over to Eldred and include this conversation around e-commerce in the space that, we talk about how small the Caribbean is, but there's millions of people, diaspora, right there in North America, as well as in Europe. So when it comes to the e-commerce space, why is it important to have that included in your pitch deck?
Well, thanks, Pauline. As I mentioned before, one of the objectives, probably one of the main objectives, is to be able to generate revenue, right, and be able to take money. I jokingly say, I've been in this space for a while, that electronic payments it's a necessary evil. You don't go into business to try to focus on payments. We need to be almost transparent on the background, but we need to be able to function and be able to facilitate the acceptance of payments in a way that the entrepreneur can focus on their business. E-commerce, like I said earlier, it's a very easy way to implement. It has no borders, if you will. So you can not only target local customers, but international customers. It has to be seamless. It has to be in a way that is compliant. When you start taking electronic payments, there's a number of regulatory concerns that you need to adhere to, and doing so in a way that you don't focus on the payment. Actually, you let your partner, if you will, focus on those things so you can focus on your business. There's a couple of things you guys have mentioned. The business processing outsourcing. We strongly believe at FAC that best of breed partnerships is key to be able to bring the latest and greatest to our customers so they can do all the things that they need to do. One of the things we're talking about businesses is, you bring in a level of expertise, but there's so many different moving parts from a business perspective. Do you outsource it? Do you partner up? We've decided from a strategic perspective that the best way to bring the best technologies, the best security, the best feature functionality is to partner up with key technology companies that bring these enhancements to the table, so our customers, the entrepreneurs, don't have to focus on payments. They can focus on their business and very easily be able to say, yes, can you take payments across borders? Yes. Can you be able to take payments 24/7? Yes. The idea is to make it easy for them.
All right. So so important to be able to also have that data on your customers. That makes your pitch deck even stronger. So David, I hate to make you the Debbie Downer, but I'm going to assign you to answer this question. What's one of the biggest mistakes people make on these pitch decks?
Yeah, it's hard to give you just one. But I think the biggest mistake is actually before the pitch deck, which is assuming that what's in the entrepreneur's head is in the investor's head, and so not taking sufficient time or making sufficient space for communicating a message that is concise yet comprehensive. A pitch deck that is too sparse is almost equally as useless as a pitch deck that is overloaded with information. And I think there is a distillation of information that's needed to be able to effectively communicate a message to an investor in a compelling way. And of course, that manifests as many things, right? It manifests as overloading the pitch deck with financial information and underinvesting on the story side. It manifests as overinvesting on the story side and not communicating the quantitative and economic aspect of the opportunity. Uh, there is a level of finesse to being able to package amount of information that's in your head as an entrepreneur. You have founded this concept, you're passionate about it, and it's important for you to be able to step back, extract that information, and package it into a digestible bite for an investor to really glean their interest. And I think that's the biggest issue I see at the outset that manifests as many other little things downstream.
I just want to
Okay.
piggyback on that, if you don't
Sure.
mind, Pauline. And what I've noticed, because I do pitch a lot, startups don't understand time when it comes to pitching. You need to have a 1 minute pitch, a 3 minute pitch, a 5 minute pitch, a 7 minute pitch, a 10 minute pitch, right? You need to be ready for all those time constraints when it comes to pitching. And I found that a lot of startups don't. If they have a 10 minute pitch, they think they can go into a 3 minute pitch with their 10 minute pitch. And I find like that's usually an issue.
It sounds like what David mentioned before as well. It's like, having this idea of, well, the person that you're communicating with knows exactly what's in your head. And when he first said that, I felt personally attacked because I have been accused of doing those things as well. So it's one of those things too where you're multitasking. So you think, well, don't you know this already? And I think that is such an important piece of information that we all need to take into consideration, especially when all of us are typing away online thinking that the information is so clear, but clarity is better. So we headed over to the LinkedIn comments, and Max Murphy has contributed to the conversation. Something I see all the time is a lack of validation of the idea outside of friends and family. Anybody wants to chime in on that?
I would say that is somewhat true. I think when I first started Veekle, I actually did some groundwork before, and I actually just bought a simple platform for like maybe $1,600. We started out as Rent Your Ride. We put it out there just to see what the feedback would have been like, to see if anyone would have even signed up or rented or anything like that. And we did have quite a few signups. We did have some rentals, and so that was like our first sort of market product fit for us. And I would agree that a lot of startups do not do market validation prior to actually getting out there. So.
Right. And I think that's we're in a world now where so connected with just about everything because all of us on our phones. And I want to head over to Eldred when it comes to this e-commerce space, because a lot of things people don't realize, and we are all consumers. Amazon continues to be the number one visited e-commerce site in the Caribbean. I've seen it. So one of the pluses, obviously inclusive of getting payments, is the data that's created. So Eldred, I want you to chime in there in terms of how important data is in the e-commerce space.
Well, as you know, Pauline, what's normally near and dear to my heart is a fraud prevention, right? Because we all think about taking payments, and when you mentioned we're all connected, many presentations that I've done, when you say we're all connected, we are all connected, the good and the bad, right? There's a lot of data out there, and obviously good data is important to understand your market, how to target your market, how to position yourself, understanding where the opportunities are, right? The best ROI. You can extract a lot of that from the data. The data we also use for analytics. It's important to leverage the new technologies that are out there, like artificial intelligence and machine learning, to be able to crunch that data. in a number of different ways to not only understand the sensitivity of the data, but the power that it has. So we have included in our in our offerings when we talk about e-commerce, the expansion of e-commerce has moved into social commerce. And there is a ton of more data coming in through social media. As you all know, everybody's on their social media, and we're converting those conversations into actual transactions. And the data that we're taking from that is extremely powerful. We've added partners that have created artificial intelligence with platforms that are able to crunch this data, understand the level of data that's coming in, where people are in their buying process, to be able to move them into executing a transaction, driving those conversations into a conversion for payments. If you're not only able to extract the data, but able to massage it in a way that benefits you, I think a larger conversation is not only about all the data's out there, is how are we leveraging the data? What technology are we using to understand how to use that data to better position ourselves? At the end of the day, we want to be able to target the right markets, the right segments. You mentioned people want to say, I want to work in the Caribbean. I've done presentations where people say, I want to work in LAC. And I said, great, where? Well, LAC. I said, there's a lot of countries, right? And understanding what markets you can successfully go in, extract that ROI that you're going after, focus on that target market of merchants, of customers that you want to be able to go to. Now it's even easier because there's so much data, but sometimes there's so much data that you don't know what to do with it. And understanding how to use the technology to extract that information from the data is key.
All right. We are scheduled to have a next break, but I want to, let our guests know what the next question is going to be. And it's a little bit influenced by Matt's question. Like, do you think that folks in the Caribbean have a bit of a data phobia? They're afraid of data? And if so, why? So think about that, and we'll be right back. And welcome back to First Atlantic Commerce. Here on the FSA Live Show, we cover all things e-commerce in the Caribbean. Our guests join us from all over the world and generously share their expertise, knowledge, and insight into the digital world and how we operate within it. If you're like UC today and joining us from YouTube, don't forget to smash that subscribe button to continue seeing content that'll help you grow your business online. Today, we're talking about funding and raising capital for Caribbean startups and growing businesses. So we want to welcome back our guests because we don't have that much time and we have a plethora of questions to ask. So just before the break, I kind of, throw this idea out of data phobia because I remember I was in an event a few years ago in Trinidad, very prominent business, one of those legacy businesses, and someone asked a question about data. And was very firm in his response. He's like, yeah, you have all this information, but I trust my gut. And I was like, okay. So when it comes to Caribbean culture, would you think it's fair to say that we have a bit of a fear of data? David, you want to take it first?
Yeah, sure. So I'll say a few things. One, I think any sort of thinking that goes against the status quo or represents a change in perspective is going to be met with resistance. And so if we're a non-sort of data-oriented society and there is a push to, making more data-informed decisions, it's going to be met with resistance, right? This is just basic human nature. That's the first thing I'll say. Second thing I'll say is that in most low trust societies, and I consider the Caribbean, unfortunately, to be a low trust society, the institutional confidence or lack thereof limits or the level of trust we place in data and institutions, right, which govern data. And so I think that that also plays a big role in the sort of mistrust we see. Thirdly, and again, this is where it comes to more so my opinion, data is useful as a tool, but data must be governed by the right approach to analysis, right? And so while I think it is generally an unwise thing to do to discredit data and rely on gut, in some cases, especially by experts, intuition is valuable, right? And so I think the challenge is to find the right balance between understanding, I suppose, who to trust based on intuition, A, and B, how to approach data analysis in a way that dignifies the data given and gets you to a useful and accurate answer.
All right. Thanks for that, David. Cherie, you want to add to that? You're on mute again. That's okay. It's a 2024 problem.
No, I was saying that I think David covered most of it. There's definitely a cultural issue when it comes to data here. Even when I was doing research for my startup, data is lacking. But it's definitely a cultural issue, but I think it's starting to get better in terms of providing like data literacy for people and just getting people to understand data insights and education around data and how we can benefit a society. I think we're going in the right direction, but there's a lot more work to be done.
Okay. And Eldrin mentioned earlier the LAC space, which is Latin America and the Caribbean folks, for those who may not know. So do you see some similarities with that, Eldrin, in terms of how data is approached within Latin America and the Caribbean?
When you're talking about data specifically?
Yeah, so we are now in a space where business creates way more data than has ever created in history. So do you see folks using that as part of their decision-making process?
Yeah, absolutely. David and Cherie mentioned a couple of things, and obviously we need to understand the environment we play in. What we experienced outside of the region is sort of a pendulum switch where we started getting more data outside of the region, specifically speaking. And the access to all this data gave us a lot of information, very good information to be able to act on. People started putting in models to massage that data and understand how to make their business grow faster, better. And then all of a sudden we started getting into an area of being uncomfortable. How much data do they have from me? How do they know all the stuff that, from me? I start talking to my friend in my living room about purchasing a motorcycle, and 5 seconds later, I get an ad on my phone. So there's a lot of data that's out there, and what we've experienced is the swing happens when people start getting uncomfortable. Right now in the Caribbean, we're starting now to get used to having more data. Outside of the Caribbean, you have regulations that have been put into place to address those concerns, like GDPR. And that's supposed to be like the gold standard on protecting people's data. I think what's going to happen in our region is we're going to start getting more comfortable with the use of data. We're going to have access to more data. We're going to have leverage technology that's been out there for a while to massage that data. and then start taking those decisions in our region that we have been taking outside of the region. And then we're going to slowly move into where the rest of the other regions are, where we're going to have to implement stuff in order to regulations in order for people to start feeling comfortable with all this new data that we have access to. I don't think data is going to go away. On the contrary, I think people are going to understand the value of having data and making this decision. David makes a good point. Leverage instinct from experts. There is a place that creates a lot of value. It's finding that sweet spot between that intuition from an expert and that data crunching from experts and data analysis. But I definitely see how more data is going to be used effectively in our region. And then shortly after, you're going to see the adding of regulations that we see outside of the region in order to make sure people feel comfortable with all that data that's out there.
Okay, it's definitely a shift that continues to evolve. Let's shift the conversation into what do we do after receiving funding? Because we're talking about raising capital and growing your business. So let's say, you've done your sales pitch, you include information that goes outside of families and friends, and we've effectively been able to get your finances. How do you manage that afterwards? Because you're excited, it's someone has validated not just your idea, but your business and trust you. What's the next step? Cherie, you want to start the ball?
Yeah, sure. So after you receive funding, I think effective management is important. So sticking to a strict budget and regularly tracking your expenses, because let me tell you, money flows out the door, right? And so it's important to prioritize your spending. It's prioritize your spending on revenue generating activities, and be transparent with investors on where funds are being used. So it not only builds trust, but it opens up for opportunities for additional funding as the business grows, right? For me, a good thing is I am a CPA, so I understand financials very well. I understand forecasting, budgeting, but not everyone comes to the startup world with that experience. And so you really have to be able to stick to a budget and track your expenses. So not because you've gotten funding means that you need to now spend the money all over the place. You still need to, in some essence, continue building that lean startup that you started with, right? And so I think effectively managing that is super important after you receive funding.
All right. David, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so. To me, it's very simple. Maybe it's more difficult in theory. It shouldn't be, but when an investor comes into your company, you make a promise to that investor, and effectively you've sold him or her a product, right? That product is a certain return, whether it's a fixed return or a variable return. All of your actions downstream of getting that cash in hand should be aligned with delivering on that product / promise. And so I think a lot of where entrepreneurs go wrong is having their actions tainted by, maybe they're distracted, maybe they're not sufficiently disciplined to steward that capital, and of course, money is spent on and / wasted on either non-value adding activities in the business or activities outside of the business. But ultimately, if you sit with an investor and you say, hey, I need your money for X, all of your activities should align with delivering on X. And so, a lot of startups feel like once the money is raised, the work is done, whereas actually that's when the work has just begun, right? So it's just a matter of discipline, and really having a very patent level of awareness that the money that is now in your bank account is not your money and has to be returned, with some level of gain on value to the investor.
Yeah, I think you have to shift the mindset because it's not free money, it's money with intention. So I imagine after you've gone all that effort and be like, oh, I finally got it, it's a bit frustrating. But I would say to any business owner out there who is searching and eventually gets to just take a minute to bask in the success that you've done that and then do the work afterwards. So we're going to go on a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to look at how technology has impacted the way startups raise capital in the Caribbean. We'll be right back. And welcome back to First Atlantic Commerce. Here on the FAC Live Show, we cover all things e-commerce in the Caribbean. Our guests join us from all over the world and generously share their expertise, knowledge, and insight into the digital world and how we operate within it. If you are like Conrad and joining us from LinkedIn, I know you're late, Conrad, that's okay. Once this live is ended, you could go and watch the replay. But if you are joining us from LinkedIn like Conrad, don't forget to like our page and follow. Continue to see content that will help you grow business online. All right, so today we're talking about funding and raising capital for Caribbean startups and growing businesses. So let's bring back in our panel of discussions, and we don't have that much time. So I want to start the conversation with Eldred. We want to look at how technology has impacted the way startups raise capital in the Caribbean. Do you have any insight on that?
Well, obviously, my perspective comes from the payment side, right? There was a couple of things that were mentioned earlier. As a startup, you end up being jack of all trades when you're starting up a company, and you don't have the resources, and you not only are the visionary and the passion, but you become the salesperson and the accountant and the legal and everything else. I've started a company before, and luckily I had some payment experience before I did that. Technology definitely facilitates a lot of the things you need to do to start up a company. Payments is absolutely one of them. Being able to take payments wherever you need to take payments. And today's business, especially in the e-commerce side, is a 24/7 business. So being able to take business while you're asleep is key. The technology exists in there. I mentioned earlier social commerce. Social commerce is leveraging new technologies, new platforms, artificial intelligence, where it is crunching data, stuff that we talked about before, 24/7 while we sleep, prioritizing information and activities that's coming in while you're asleep, and converting those activities into actual sales while you're asleep. So technology is not only key to making sure that you're successful, but being able to extract that data, put effective marketing strategies and programs into place to go after new markets. Technology is all over our business. It's not just payments. But I think one of the things that I've learned from not only on the payment side, but also in previous life as an entrepreneur, is that we need to know, more importantly, not only our strengths, but our weaknesses, and being able to identify those weaknesses and being able to bring in those strengths that we need when we bring in that capital. So not only can we leverage the technology, but we can leverage the expertise that we need and not be that jack of all trades, master of none, if you will.
Yeah, that's really difficult to not be the master of everything because you want to do everything all the time. But I want to shift to Cherie as the founder of Veekle. What are the emerging trends and opportunities you see in the Caribbean within the funding landscape?
Interesting. I would say moving in the right direction. There's a lot more focus on building out an ecosystem. So not just the funding aspect, but what goes beyond funding. I realize that we're building an ecosystem. So when I look at programs like Tech Beach Retreat, other programs starting up in the region, there is a lot more focus on not just, okay, yeah, you have a great idea, let's help you, but it's really supporting you in every step of your journey. So I would say building out an ecosystem, I can see that's changing in the right direction. And there are a lot more grant opportunities that are available for startups. Yes, the application process is probably a nightmare, but nonetheless, grant opportunities are available for startups. Development Bank of Jamaica does do a lot for entrepreneurs. Recently, a few of us female founders got funded to go to Black Women in Tech Week. So there's a lot more focus on building out an ecosystem. That's what I would say.
Okay, and mentioning Tech Beach, which First Atlantic Commerce also supports, as well as David did mention the IDB. I feel like we need to shift the conversation around the role of accelerators and incubators, because that's also some common terminologies that we hear, but we don't necessarily understand how does it play in terms of supporting, what role does it play in terms of supporting Caribbean startups post-funding? So David, you want to shine some light on that?
Sure. So, and I'd fully echo the points about ecosystem building. I think that is the most sustainable way for the startup success and progress to evolve. Even sort of, entities and regions like Silicon Valley, the reason why they're successful is because they have a mature ecosystem built, right? And so I think this is a necessary stage of evolution. On incubators and accelerators, I mean, they're essentially startup schools, right? Incubators are early stage startup schools that help you get from idea to company. And accelerators are more mature startup schools that get you from kind of small or super early stage company to less super early stage company. And so ultimately what they do is they ensure you have the right tools, both tangible and intangible tools. So, you have access to the right software tools or hardware, etc. At the very least to build an MVP. But even more importantly, the right levels of mentorship, support, and resources you need. Some of them also come with financial resources, some don't. But their role is to programmatize the process of startup success. And so they're massively useful, certainly for the investment community in de-risking the investments, right? I can certainly tell you from our standpoint, one of the issues that I had seen coming back to the Caribbean was that the quality of startups just wasn't quite where it is in the more advanced economies. And it doesn't really make sense for any one investor group to expend capital to increase the level of sophistication across the ecosystem. However, when everyone pitches in And all ecosystem players sort of do their part: development banks, the government, private sector, etc. The collective body of knowledge in the community increases, and this necessarily increases the quality of the startups, even outside of incubators and accelerators.
So what you're basically saying is we just need somebody who is multi-billionaire. It's like, let's just throw some money in the Caribbean and hope for the best. And, I think that's majority of us think that resources is going to solve the problem, but it's also a lot of learning from everybody. All right, so we're going to close off the conversation with one question for everyone. I'll start with Cherie. What would be the first piece of advice you'll give yourself post, founding a Veekle, as someone who is an aspiring entrepreneur in the Caribbean and raising funds? What would be the one piece of advice you'll give yourself?
Looking back then when I first started, I was pretty relatively unknown in the entrepreneurship space in the Caribbean. I've been an entrepreneur for quite some time in the US, but not relatively known in the Caribbean. And so one advice I would say is you have to actually network in this region. Relationships are so important here to get to where you want to be in terms of your funding targets. I would say networking, building strong relationships with potential investors is critical. It's it establishes trust and it shows a commitment to the region. So I would say take the time to network. Take the time to network. It's more important here than I think it's in other regions.
So important. Thank you so much for that, Cherie. And what about you, David? What advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs in the Caribbean who are looking to raise funding?
Again, it's hard to distill, but I would say just practice discipline, right? Do as you say as you do. That goes a long way. You are, venturing out on your own to deliver a promise that you have made to investors, to stakeholders, to customers, to every stakeholder in your chain, right? And all of your actions should be aligned to delivering on these promises. And if you're disciplined, you'll wake up every morning, you'll put in the hours required, and you'll also express a sufficient level of dissatisfaction with mediocrity that will drive you to excel. Operating as a startup is not an easy journey. And so it requires a tremendous level of discipline and self-management to be able to succeed.
I think that's great advice, regardless of an entrepreneur or not. Just everything in general requires discipline, but especially for an entrepreneur. Thank you so much for that, David. And Eldred, any piece of advice from the e-commerce space when it comes to this navigating, raising funding, capital within the Caribbean startup space?
Obviously from my perspective, the payment component is super easy, right? You just partner up with a company that has the technology, the security, the compliance, the connections, and that should be on the back of your mind. It shouldn't be on top of mind. It should be not the focus of your business. The only advice that I have, not only from the experience that I've had, but from startups that I've seen is, number one, try to fund it yourself as much as you can. You're lowering not only the risk associated with taking other people's money and having to comply with their demands, or giving away part of your company upfront. You don't want to do that. If you don't have to, understanding what your limitations are, right? So you're asking for funds, being able to tell somebody not only what you're going to do, but more importantly, what you're not going to do, how you're not going to mismanage their funds. And if you don't have the background, the expertise in doing that, make sure that you line up that expertise, either outsourcing it or bringing it in-house to be able to manage those funds, and then really focus on things that we've talked about, right? Where are you going? If you're going to go after a specific market, a specific target merchant, have it well defined. Don't look at the Caribbean as one. Look at a specific market, and then figure out how you're going to, bring in the money. E-commerce is very easy in comparison to other payment acceptance channels. So I think that part of it is really the easy part. The other stuff is a lot more. You should focus more on that. How to find your target market, understand how to bring in the resources, and get your company off the ground.
All right. Thank you so much, Eldred. And on that note, we want to thank our guests, Cherie and David, for joining us today as we discussed funding and raising capital for Caribbean startups and growing businesses, as well as Ashley Sims on LinkedIn. Don't worry. I know daylight savings time messed us all up because I got up like, am I late? But it's this whole hour come back. But that's okay. The live show will be available across LinkedIn and YouTube on the replay. When you go onto the link of the video, you'll be able to see the entire conversation. So thanks again for joining us. And be sure to follow pages to be notified for our next FSC Live panel discussion. See you soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.